Hi, everyone. I'm Claudine Wong from KTVU Channel 2 News, and I want to welcome you to this forum of candidates running for a seat on the El Cerrito City Council. Today's forum is sponsored by the Contra Costa County Election Division, CCTV, and the League of Women Voters of Diablo Valley and West Contra Costa. We are holding this roundtable via Zoom and taping it in the CCTV studio. I also want to mention that as we bring our candidates up, they will have name cards on them with their email addresses. So if you have other questions, want to reach out to them after this forum, that's a great way to do that and to contact them. We have 8 candidates running for the El Cerrito City Council. With us today, we have Lisa Motoyama, Paul Fedeli, Arthur Yee, Tessa Rudnick, and Isis. Matt Burnham, Jennifer Greel, and William Casanes are not able to join us. And so let's start off this forum. We want to talk about what is important to you, what's your priority, and we want to give you a chance for the folks watching to introduce yourselves. So Lisa Motoyama, let's start with you and give the people watching a little bit about yourself.
I'm Lisa Motoyama, and I'm running for El Cerrito City Council because I really care about the city, and we are in a budget situation that really needs a lot of work to address it. And with my background in affordable housing and finance and my love for the city, I hope to bring all that experience to bear on the budget issues and all the issues that affect our city.
All right, Paul Fedeli.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Fedeli. I grew up in El Cerrito in the Richmond area. I knew what El Cerrito used to be and what it's become, and now I'm the mayor pro tem of the city. I'm running because, as has been said, we're in a fiscal crunch, a fiscal crisis, and El Cerrito needs to get back on track. We also have tremendous wildfire areas we need to deal with, and we need to build our San Pablo Avenue back up so retail and businesses can come back into this town. I've been here for 30 years after working in Washington and Sacramento, and I believe after 4 years, I'm finally getting my act together on this council, and I've learned how to, so I'm hoping to be reelected. Thank you.
Arthur Yee.
Hi there, my name is Arthur. I'm actually looking for your vote for City Council because I care a lot about the city. Everybody knows about the budget crisis. I try to do my best to make the best decisions for all of us.
All right. And Tessa Rudnick?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Tessa Rudnick. I'm a public sector technologist. I've worked in local government IT here in the Bay Area for over a decade. I'm also a Bay Area native. I'm a young parent living in El Cerrito, and it is an interesting perspective being someone who's from the Bay Area, growing up here, seeing what's happening now, wanting to preserve what's really great about El Cerrito, but also having the skills and the competencies needed to be able to effectively govern El Cerrito is what I can provide if I'm elected. I'm a young parent, as I mentioned, and having the perspective of young parents in El Cerrito is really important because we are the fastest growing demographic in El Cerrito. It's important that we preserve the diversity of our community while raising our children here and making sure that we are being really fiscally prudent. This budget situation is absolutely no joke whatsoever. There's a lot of very tough decisions that are going to be needed to be made. And with my background in public sector finance and in technology, it's a really good marriage of what skills will be needed on council and how I can synthesize all this data information and really help improve the data literacy of the city and help us make these really hard decisions in the most effective way possible.
And Isis, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Isis. I am the only Black candidate running for City Council. While all of the other candidates have addressed the top issues, which are the budget, housing, and the one issue that hasn't been addressed is police reform. As an African American woman, as a Black woman, I'm deeply concerned that our voice will be minimized and that certain issues will not be addressed. as such, I think it's really important for our community to have a voice in government. There's an old saying that when African Americans succeed, when Black succeeds, everyone benefits. It's not a siloed situation. It's an inclusive situation. The reason I'm running is that I'm deeply concerned that if we do not have a voice, we will be displaced in El Cerrito. We will no longer be able to live in El Cerrito as working people. We can't afford our housing in El Cerrito as working people because of gentrification. I have some other concerns that I'll address later on this evening, but thank you so much for your time.
Well, Isis, let me just stay with you as we talk about priorities, because you guys have all addressed budget, you have addressed social justice, you have addressed housing and different things. So I'd like to get each one of you to tell me, day one when you walk, in the door, what is the priority for you in saying, okay, this is the first project of many that I will tackle, the first couple of projects. Where is your priority, first day on the job?
So as I said, I have three priorities: the budget, affordable housing, and police reform. With respect to the budget, and when I say we, I'm being inclusive here. In terms of city government, we tend to stick with what's known, which is cutting the budget, raising taxes. It's kind of like the same old song that really doesn't solve the root cause of the issue. And the root cause of the issue is we keep relying on taxes to fund city government. There are other alternative avenues that we can explore to be able to fund city government, and not necessarily at the expense of our residents. Some taxes are reasonable. Other taxes, in my opinion, are unreasonable. So that's the first issue. The second issue with respect to affordable housing, there's something called the El Cerrito Specific Plan. And the El Cerrito Specific Plan, from the perspective of an African American woman, a Black woman, is gentrification along a certain corridor within our community. Now, the issue with that specific plan is that it allows developers, and generally speaking, all developers who come into El Cerrito have the opportunity to buy out of their obligation to provide affordable housing. Now, the individuals who benefit from the specific plan are white middle-class homeowners. They are not the Black and brown people of El Cerrito. In fact, what will end up happening if this plan moves forward is that it will displace, via increased rents, affordability for Black and brown people in El Cerrito. Now, El Cerrito has a history of being a white town. It does not have a history of favoring Black residents. In fact, we had to fight to get Martin Luther King holiday recognized by the City Council of El Cerrito. So, in essence, we need to ensure affordable housing for our Black, brown, essential workers and heroes. Lastly, in terms of police reform really has to do with understanding why we're using paramilitary equipment on the citizens of our country, on the citizens of El Cerrito. We have a drone, our police force uses a drone to patrol, I believe it's 3.7 square miles. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's correct. Why do we have that? Why are we using that? Why are we patrolling this area, this really small area, via drone?
All right, Isis, I am going to interrupt you, not because this is not an important topic, but because I think we'll be able to weigh in more specifically on it and let the other candidates as well. But we know those are their three priorities. I'm going to go to Arthur Yee, and we will table that discussion, but we will get back to it certainly. Arthur Yee, your priorities for the city of El Cerrito.
Well, first of all, I have to say that the council are making good amends with smaller government, but I think that we need to do smaller. I'm not sure that, our population is under 26,000 people, and we have a small revenue source. And we've been spending like we're a big town, like we're a Berkeley or a Oakland or San Francisco. And we need to scale that down and pay for what we have in terms of our means. So what I'm initiating is that we have less smaller government, but we also ask the community to be more involved. So an example would be like we can ask the community to do more public service, such as clean parks, streets, volunteer in senior centers, our pool, maybe a volunteer fire department and a volunteer maybe police department. So we can have more community involvement. So it's this kind of a drastic change of right now. I think that the city is run more like a business. We should actually be more involved within our community and serve and take part and actually serve our community instead of, here's some money, give us services. No, we need to actually serve our city as individuals, as residents.
All right. Paul Fedeli, your priorities on day one?
I think we have to emphasize on day one, we get back to the finances of El Cerrito because there is nothing more important. And register with the residents that for the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, there's not going to be money for any new services, any new parks, any new things that we haven't had already. It's going to be a tough 4 years, but the council as it is now has moved forward with a plan, and we've had about $6 million worth of cuts and have kept the basic needs and services like our parks, our swimming pool, our senior center open and available to our residents. So we won't be hindered and our folks won't be hurt that much. And there are some public safety issues that do need to be addressed. As President Obama said, every city council, every mayor should be at this time in our lives fine-tuning, reconsidering how our police departments should be providing those safety services. And that's something that we can do. I want to, from day one, what the city council can do on every ordinance, every agenda item that comes before the city council, there's a financial consideration, there's environmental considerations. I want to have an equity consideration, every council, so that staff considers that, whatever we're doing, what's the equity issues involved? What are the equity issues that the council can respond to? If there's no equity issues, we move on to the next ordinance and talk about it. Also, fire. I'll just end with that. Every day, it's no longer a fire season that should be starting in the next 3 weeks. It's every day, every hour, and we're not going to close Fire Station 72 as some people might want. We're going to have a good budget for our fire department, and we're going to, as Arthur has said, build our volunteerism, local neighborhoods, making sure that our weed abatement programs are taken care of so we won't have fire problems. And just finally, one of the other things I want to deal with is global warming and plastics. We need to have a foodware ban on plastics in El Cerrito. It's not something I want to hurt our businesses with, but we need to tell the rest of the communities and our East Bay communities that we're on board as well on that.
All right. Tessa Rudnick, your priorities, day one.
Day one is not going to be a pretty day. I think the folks who really understand what's going on with El Cerrito city government understand what a crisis we're in right now. And I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying it because it's pragmatic. Right now, we have a lot of really severe cuts that we need to make. And it's not just because we care about small government. It's because we are not going to be able to survive long-term economically as a community if we don't make these cuts, if we don't increase our bond rating. So to me, day one, what's the most important is transparency around the budget process, around the data we're collecting, also being able to analyze the systems that we've implemented here in El Cerrito for equity, because a lot of people don't understand that these software systems that have been developed and are used often perpetuate systemic racism. So we need to be really, really clear and cognizant about what systems we're using. And a lot of people touched on it, but it is incredibly important. Public safety and doing it to scale, understanding our data. I was the former CIO for the Department of Police Accountability in San Francisco, so I have a lot of experience in civilian oversight of law enforcement. I want to be able to really dive into the data so we can best tailor our public safety services so we can begin to demilitarize police and really focus on more of a community model. Also, we in El Cerrito cannot solve the world's problems. We can solve El Cerrito's problems, and then we can work with our regional partners to begin to solve these bigger issues. I think that's the best approach we can take. Again, I don't want to come in like a bull in a china shop into City Hall to make all these changes. But really, what we need pragmatic and smart leadership.
Right, Lisa Murayama, your first day, what does it look like?
My first day, my first priority is to make sure that we continue to keep to the budget. I think that is one of the hardest things to say. Like Paul mentioned, this is not the time for adding new programs, new facilities, new staff. And unfortunately, that's a really tough thing to do. But that's what I'm prepared to do, to keep to the budget so that we can rebuild our fund reserves. One of the reasons why the pandemic has hit El Cerrito so hard financially is because we've lost our fund reserve. And it's going to take until 2023 to refill that reserve so that we're back to a reserve that will be there for us when the next pandemic comes. So I think that is my first priority. Also, my second priority is to start focusing on all the housing development and affordable housing opportunities that we have in El Cerrito and making sure that they move forward. I think the best way to ensure our community diversity and vibrance is to make sure that there's a place for everyone in El Cerrito to live. And that, is going to require more development because we don't have enough housing right now. And most of that housing will be focused on San Pablo Avenue because that's where our higher density areas are. And I think having worked on the San Pablo specific plan as a planning commissioner, I hope that we can do an amendment to address any issues that had come up in the specific plan before, but also to set that plan up as an amendment moving forward so that we can have the right kind of development that we want to see to support people and businesses in El Cerrito. And the third thing is just to manage expectations, because I think all of us as residents of El Cerrito, we love our city, we love the people and the programs that are a part of our city, and we want to see more. And to say right now, this is not that time, but we value that. We value the people that work in our city. We value the people that live in our city, and to try to make that balance between budget and expectations and what we need to do.
I'm curious because, El Cerrito, like all other communities, faced certain challenges prior to 2020, and then we had 2020, and that added a whole nother layer. And one of those layers, I think, is in terms of cohesion of community and division and where people stand and their ability to move forward together as a community. I want to know what you guys think of where El Cerrito kind of stands in that conversation, because as you said, in order to have a conversation, everyone kind of needs to be at least in the same book, maybe not on the same page, but maybe at least in the same chapter. Paul Fedeli, let's start with you, and you tell me what you think, the situation is in El Cerrito with the ability to have this conversation and move forward.
I think we're going to have this conversation going forward just based on what we're about to see with COVID issues coming to us. We're going to have, with housing and tenant and small landlord issues, we're going to have another crisis coming up in the next 3 to 4 months if Sacramento and the feds don't act. But I'm very optimistic, even with this hardship. And I have my own little personal story about how we can work together as far as volunteers. Like I said, I grew up here, and there used to be lights at the El Cerrito Plaza and along San Pablo Avenue. And for the last 5 years, there haven't been. And I asked why, and people said, well, because the plaza doesn't do it and the retail doesn't do it. So I talked to the plaza, they put lights up. I talked to our city manager, she said, let's put lights up. And the Chamber of Commerce helped with all the retail along San Pablo Avenue. We had lights. It made us feel good. It was good for our retail partners along San Pablo Avenue. And we're gonna have to begin thinking that even more with our retail. How do we bring them back? And that demonstrated to me with very little cost that we can all work together to feel good about our community. And our retailers loved it. People would come up to me and say, thank you for putting lights up. A very simple thing. But we continue to also need to make sure that our committees and our commissions in our city are available to citizens and residents so we can hear from them. There's been talk about getting rid of those because of a cost. It's insurance to make sure that we communicate and we remain transparent going forward.
All right, Arthur Yee, tell me your thoughts on the ability to have a conversation moving forward in a unified way.
Well, I think in part of our town is that we don't really talk to our neighbors. We're not really doing what other talking to fellow councilmen or mayors to see what they're actually doing. To me, I read the newspaper. I have not heard anything regarding El Cerrito locally in the paper at all. So our message is not being communicated out there that we are actually having the same problems such as in Albany or at Alameda or the San Francisco or Berkeley or at Oakland. So we need to be more engaged with the media, saying that we're having the same problems as well. Um, I think that's what we need to do. We're a small town, but we need to go out there and spread our wings.
Isis, let me go to you. How do you feel about the conversation? And let's unmute you so we can make sure we can hear
Sorry, Claudia, you froze there for a second. Can
Here
you
you
repeat
go.
the question?
I'm just saying, what do you think about the conversation and the feeling in the community? Is there a sense of unity, a sense of division? What needs to happen to keep this conversation moving forward in a unified way?
So honestly, I believe that there's a sense of division in the community. From the African American community specifically, I have been told that El Cerrito is racist and that there is no unity, and that Black and Brown people are being pushed out. That is the feeling of my constituency.
I disagree with that.
Do you agree with it, Isis? That's what you're saying. You're hearing. Is that what you feel as well?
I do.
And so, what do you think that you would do to address that? I guess is the question.
So what I would do to address my constituents' concerns, and the reason I'm running, is because we need to have a voice at the table. We need to be heard. We need to have the conversation in order to move forward. So it's really akin to anti-racism training and bias training, to educate the board, to educate the community how working Black people are experiencing El Cerrito. It is not the same vignette that is drawn by other individuals in the community. And how I would have the conversation is by bringing in my constituents and having them tell stories about their experience as Black people in El Cerrito.
Okay. Lisa Moriyama, let's ask you on how you feel about division and the conversation and continuing a unified conversation. Do you agree with what Isis has said about people feeling a lot of division?
I would agree in that I feel that there is division in El Cerrito right now. I think that there are a lot of different conversations going in our city, and it really hurts me because I feel that we are sort of splitting apart in a certain way. So one time, I want to tell a story about how I was getting a coffee at Well Grounded on Stockton Street. And there was a group of police officers having their coffee around the corner. And, there was a young African American young man getting his coffee, and you could see he was visibly nervous. There was this tension in the air with the other people getting coffee as well. And I walked around the corner to sit at a little table with the police about 10 feet away from them. And there was tension. You could feel it in the air. And I thought, that's not good for me. I don't feel good. It's not a feeling of safety for that young man. And you could tell the police were feeling too. So this is not a good place for all of us to be. And, I don't have some easy answer. I think those kinds of trainings like implicit bias training, anti-racist training are important. I think individual conversations with people are really important as well. I think there are things happening in our country regarding police that are really serious and awful. And we need to address that as a country and as people. There are things that are not happening in El Cerrito, and those are okay to talk about too. So I think that what's happening is that the conversation is stopping because nobody wants to, they're afraid to go there, or they don't want to go there, or they're not prepared to. So I think one of the things that we can do as local government is to help people have the tools to talk about this. so that we can address it and come back together as a community. So many people in our community directly have been hurt. I was at a Black Lives Matter protest and I was walking away from it, and there was an Asian woman who said to me, well, what about all the things that are happening against Asians in our community? It's like, well, I don't know. I don't know what we are doing. What can we do? What should we be doing? So this question of how to bring us all back together is not, there's like a power and a dominance and the dominated, but there's more in El Cerrito because we're such a diverse and broad community that we need a lot more tools to bring everybody back together. And if I'm elected, I am really committed to working on that, because I think one of the things, to quote Isabel Wilkerson, is to go from, not just empathy to radical empathy, to move from equity to racial justice. And I think we need to make that shift. And it's going to take a lot of work, but I'm committed to doing that.
All right. Tessa Rudnick, your thoughts on division and unity in the conversation.
In my little pocket of North El Cerrito, we are a very, very diverse community here. There's no denying when you look at the demographics of El Cerrito, that it's predominantly Caucasian. However, in my neighborhood, it is extremely racially diverse. However, I was talking with my Black neighbor across the street, whose mother purchased a house in the 60s and was being basically, they were putting a whole rigmarole on them because they were Black, trying to buy a home in this area of El Cerrito. That since changed a lot because, again, my neighborhood's very diverse and we're proud of that diversity. And the most important thing we can do is make sure that residents are able to stay in their home, because my concern is if my Black and brown neighbors move out, who's going to be moving in? We really need to make sure that we are being able to preserve what's really great about this community, but also recognize that, it is a challenging thing. I've been involved in anti-racist work really for decades. And I'm a member of GARE, which is the Government Alliance on Racial Equity. So these are conversations we need to be having. A lot of this, to me, and not to sound too crazy, but capitalism is really what has perpetuated whiteness. And we need to confront that head on and figuring out ways to design systems so that there's a lot more transparency and equity. And we can't be afraid of prosperity in our community, because that rising tide will lift all boats. And as long as we are ensuring equity in the system, that there's transparency around it, that there's not people who are, trying to manipulate information in order to make it seem like, oh, we are doing something and ends up being gestural but not tangible. We need tangible results. And I do think that focusing on economic development, focusing on small businesses, focusing on Black and brown owned businesses, that is what is going to preserve what is great about El Cerrito, also what's great about the entire Bay Area, and make sure that we're able to maintain diversity.
So go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I lost my train of thought, so go ahead.
Sorry about that. I did want to go back to, because you were addressing getting specifics, and I talked about I would go back to the police issue and departments, and so we can drill down more specifically into where people stand. And so let me just follow up with you and say, where do you stand in terms of police funding, in reforms, in different kinds of approaches to the police department in El Cerrito?
It's a really great question, and it's a question I'm very passionate about, having served as the CIO for the Department of Police Accountability in San Francisco, which is a civilian-led oversight agency separate from SFPD. So if folks have complaints against SFPD officers, they can go to this neutral organization where there are investigators and legal teams to be able to support in their path towards justice and reconciliation. And a lot of that work, what I found to be very important is how it is that we're analyzing the data and how it is that we're making it available for the public so that they can make decisions on their own, that we're not siloing this information about what's happening. Of course, there are certain protections that make it very challenging, but things like SB 1421 are helping. What we need to do is really systemically look at what public safety is in the United States, but all we can really think of is California for a lot of it, because California, we are obliged to POBRA and state laws. So we can be advocates on the state level, even on the county level, to be able to try to encourage reforms. And then here in El Cerrito, we can be a lot more diligent about the kind of data we're collecting, how it is that we're presenting that data. And also when we're looking at the budget itself, I am against militarized police forces. Not only is it's threatening public safety overall, but it's also a really bad use of public funds. And it's our fiduciary duty to protect our community. And a part of that is understanding our response. So I don't think we should approach the police budget with a hammer. We need to approach it with a surgeon's knife. We need to really look at the call data, call volume, types of calls, call for service, so that we can better tailor our community response to what the data is telling us, but being agile enough to be able to fluctuate based on community needs. Because either everybody has been a victim of violence at one point in their life, or they know someone who's been a victim of violence. And it's really important that we have police officers in our community who are trained, ready, and capable to be able to support us, because right now, domestic violence and child abuse is on the rise because of COVID and this time of social isolation. These are things that we can't deny, that it's really important that we, the most basic thing we can do as a community is protect our community.
Okay, thank you. Arthur Yee, I'm going to go to you. Do you think, how do you feel about funding for the police departments or the El Cerrito Police Department specifically, and reforms that may or may not need to be put into place?
I think the community has already spoken that we need to reform the police department. The best way for me to do it is to maybe reduce two officers. And we need to partner with our neighboring cities, such as Albany, Berkeley, Richmond, Kensington, and develop a new task force that would actually would do traffic stops and also mental illness calls. The problem with policing in this country is that when police shows up with a gun, and that's our interaction with the police. Every time we're pulled over now with a traffic stop, that person has a gun. So we need to change our interactions with policing. And the way we can do that is by partnering with our neighbors' cities, because we couldn't do it alone with our budget cuts. So that's my suggestion.
All right. And Paul Fedeli, let's talk to you about how you feel about reforms, changes in funding structures for the El Cerrito Police Department.
Well, I think there needs to be reforms. I don't go along with the just easily saying defunding, because I think we have a good police department, a progressive police department in El Cerrito, but there's amazing things that they can change and do. We're going to be cutting back $1.4 million from our police department, and I've been pressing them to do even more. And to be more transparent, to work with our county to make sure that some of the obligations for mental health can be taken care of there. Often, police are sometimes our heroes, but often there are assailants as well. And it's all about accountability. And as some of us have said, we're sending police officers with guns to too many places. And like any police department, they're hesitant to change. City Council and I need to help change that and press them on that. And we're going to be having in October a workshop meeting about police here in El Cerrito. But I wanted to get back to one more thing about some of the racial issues. I just want to say that El Cerrito isn't unsensitive. We've done all the symbolic things of painting Black Lives Matter. Next week, we're going to be raising a Black Lives Matter flag above our city. And our human resources, our human relations committee, as I mentioned, is going to be having, as Isis mentioned, a whole series of public discussions about racism in our city, where they're going to be talking about what their lives are like and how it can be improved in El Cerrito. So those are the kind of communications back and forth that they've done. And I just want to say, too, that El Cerrito is the first city in the Bay Area to have a Martin Luther King march. 31 years we've marched for Martin Luther King and gone to El Cerrito High. It was difficult. It was a battle, as Isis said, but that has become our single most important march in El Cerrito, and it brings our community together. It's a center point for what we can do. But on police, we need to re-examine practices, staffing, and procedures, absolutely.
All right, Isis, I am getting the sense that you would like to weigh in on this. Certainly, I told you we'd come back to this issue of which one of your priorities. Tell me how you feel about reforms and funding structures for the police department.
So before I address that particular piece, I want to respond to Paul Fedeli's comment about we were the first Bay Area city to honor Martin Luther King Day. I live across the street from the St. Peter's Church, and I live across the street from the individual who is responsible for producing the celebration every year. According to her, St. Peter's Church had to march for successive years before the El Cerrito City Council would recognize the Martin Luther King holiday. It was not wholeheartedly embraced.
That's true.
Really took time, energy, and effort.
30 years ago. 30 years ago.
Okay, and so I think there's agreement that this was something that didn't happen
Right.
easily and without a fight.
So without further interruption, hopefully, the issue really is that it was the Black community, not the white community. It was the Black community who made this change. It was not the white El Cerrito City Council who made this change. It was my community who made this change.
Correct.
So let's set that aside for a second. So let's talk about policing in El Cerrito. And when we talk about policing in El Cerrito, let's talk about the need for paramilitary equipment and defining what paramilitary equipment is. Paramilitary equipment is equipment that was formerly used by the Army against combatants who had the identical training that our armed forces have. And their equipment was to enable them to kill each other. Taking that equipment and that knowledge and diluting it down, and then using that equipment and knowledge against unarmed citizens or protesting citizens is questionable at best and unconscionable at worst. So with respect to,
yeah, I'm sorry, Isis. Let me just ask you then in terms of actions that you would, you have what you're saying about this type of equipment, but what would you do on the council specifically about it?
So what I would do specifically on the council is I would convene a commission of individuals, of citizens, to investigate what paramilitary equipment we use, why we use it, and the necessity to use it. From that commission, from that investigation, we can then use the data to determine whether we need to continue funding this equipment and these tactics.
Okay. Lisa Murayama, let me go to you in terms of funding and reforms at the police department as well, and where do you stand?
So first, I would like to say that the police department, speaking to Chief Keith, the police department is making a big effort to be really transparent, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate the police for all the good things they've done over the years for our community. One of the things is, their relationship with the teenagers at the high school and the mountain biking team. So that said, I know everybody can always do better. I think we need to really look at what is actually happening. I think one of the things about the drone is that is our piece of equipment. There is now online logs of every month of what that drone was used for and the outcome of it. So any resident can look and see, where was it pointed? What was it used for? There's also a lot more data and FAQs on the website so that we can all learn about what the police is really doing and understand better when we make decisions about what happens with the police. I think the other part of the police is that, I think everybody, in El Cerrito cares and we want to see changes happen. But when something happens to our neighbor, at our home, or like a bike accident on the street with a car, we expect the police to be there right away. And I think that's where we need to balance. How are we going to be responsive as a city and still make these cuts? So I think that's the tough part. I think, as Paul mentioned, the police, we are expecting the police to make a lot of cuts. They committed to make a lot of cuts. There's still more to come, and we need to balance that.
All right. We only have a handful of minutes left before you guys make your closing statements, and so many issues that we could stay for hours and talk about when you talk about housing and businesses and economy. I do want to ask, and Lisa, I'm going to stay with you in terms of how COVID, how social justice, how everything that has happened over climate change and fires and things that we have dealt with over the last 6-7 months have changed you as a candidate in terms of when you're looking forward to this race and how you reach out to the constituents and the voters.
Yes. Well, I think, I'm really running because of all these issues. I think if the budget was great and we had a big cushion and it was all about new programs, opening new businesses and ribbon cuttings, nobody needs me to be on the city council. But because they have these really tough decisions to make and tough budgets to stick to, and to unfortunately have to disappoint people, I'm ready to do that, and that's why I'm running. And I think the more we experience this pandemic about how things are really tough for everybody in different ways has made me more committed to making those hard decisions and serving on the City of El Cerrito Council to make those things better. I think, like I said, if it was all good times, I wouldn't really need to step up for this, but it's because it's tough that I do want to step up.
Arthur Yee, tell me how things over the last 6-7 months have changed you as a candidate.
Well, as the last, I've been doing my shopping locally to support the local businesses, and I see that, El Cerrito has not really changed much since the last 6 years I've been in this, living in the city, and that's why I'm running to make these changes. I've been talking to more of my neighbors and people who live in the town what their issues are. And they're all telling me that, El Cerrito is hard to build, hard to build an addition to your house, how hard to build new housing. And as you drive in my neighborhood of El Cerrito Plaza, you see a lot of empty plots. Those are lost revenues. So we're not taking advantage of those lost, opportunities to collect revenue for the city. And our businesses, there's tons of vacant, abandoned businesses. It's the message is that, El Cerrito is hard to do business, and we need to change that. And just by talking to people the last 7 months, that's how I've been, been like, wow, this is what we need to do. That's why I'm running.
All right. Isis, how has the last several months changed how you feel about being a candidate and running for the council?
The change has been profound. I am constantly talking to individuals in my community and listening to their stories. And we don't necessarily know what each of us is going through, but for a lot of us, it's an unprecedented is too small a word. It's a frightening time. And there is so much uncertainty in the world today that it's hard not to be overwhelmed by it. So as a candidate, I am moving forward to help the people in my community retain the services they need, get the support they need, assure them that they won't be evicted from their homes, assure them that they will be able to find work, assure them that we will be able to weather this storm, all of them. So that's how the last 6-7 months have changed me.
Tessa Rudnick, how are you a different candidate today than, let's say, we all were in January?
I had a mentor a long time ago tell me that the best kind of public sector practitioners are people who maintain a 50-50 yin-yang balance of activists and analysts. So I'm hearing a lot of passion from people, which is great, of what it is that we can do in order to make our community better. There's also this analyst element to it, as can we actually follow through with the promises that we're making? Is this viable given the municipal code? Is this economically feasible? These are really challenging systems thinking issues. This is a really hard time. My big motivation for running to be very honest, is grief. I lost my father, and then I lost my grandmother, and it was during COVID. So I had to wear a mask when saying goodbye to my grandmother, who I was very close with. And it is with their spirit that I'm realizing that there has to be people like me who have formal training in public sector finance, public sector technology, has the skill set, but is pivoting away from being in that practitioner world to the policymaker world, because really the future of government is in having practitioners who have these skill sets. It is the future of our community. So it is really the best thing that I can think of, given what's going on with our community, is to serve on council in this capacity.
All right. And I'm very sorry for your loss. Paul Fedeli, let's talk to you about how you're a different candidate now than you were prior to everything that has happened over the last several months.
Well, as it's been said, every person and every city has a COVID story. I like to think that I have a big heart, and people that watch City Council know that I cry a lot at City Council. And I think my heart is bigger now. I came on 4 years ago, as I said, this is my hometown when it was a good time, when we were talking about Centennial Park and opening a new store and more affordable housing along San Pablo Avenue. This isn't a good time. My two daughters are back home. My college-age daughters are living with me, and they're very proud that I'm going to hang in there and stick this through and make sure that during the hard time, when I have to say no to people, maybe I'll be crying again, but I know that our city will be back on its feet financially.
All right. So many important topics that we were able to touch, so many more that certainly are in front of us. But we've gotten to that point in this forum where we are at our closing statements. And here's how it's going to work. Everyone is going to get 2 minutes to answer or to give their closing statement. We do have timers there who are going to give you a yellow card when you have 30 seconds left and a red card when you need to stop because your time is up. And so then and if you don't, then I will stop you in terms of equity and fairness for everyone to have the same amount of time. So we will begin our closing statements, and Arthur Yee will let you start.
Hey there, once again, my name is Arthur Yee, and I'm running for City Council. I'm there to make the best decisions for our town. And I'm also not going to be, I don't want to be a politician, and I'm not going to plan to seek a higher office. So I'm going to make the best decisions for our town. And I'm going to try to have a smaller government. We need to spend within our means. And lastly, we got to partner with our neighboring towns, with our Albany and Berkeley and El Cerrito, so we can create more services such as maybe reforming the police. And lastly, I talked about service. We need to, as a councilman, you're practically volunteering your time. The residents should actually serve our town and work and volunteer at the community center or help clean trash or pick up at the parks. And I think the way we can get out of this, this budget problem is by maybe building more homes for everyone, building more businesses. So maybe we can expand our planning and building department so we can say, hey, we're actually open for business. And to create new homes and that which would bring local jobs and eventually local revenue. And lastly is that we haven't really talked about shopping locally. We all need to shop locally. Not many people know that, if you shop at the local El Cerrito grocery store on San Pablo, that's actually a Richmond-based business. And a lot of residents don't know that if you shop at these Richmond-based businesses, the revenue of the taxes go to Richmond. They don't go back to El Cerrito. So we need to educate our residents where to shop, and that we should think about El Cerrito first.
Okay. Thank you so much, Arthur Yee. Isis, we'll let you give your closing statement. And I'm going to stop you really quickly because you're muted and let you start again so we can make sure our time starts on time.
Thank you for allowing me to participate. As a candidate, my top 3 priorities are to ensure that we have a balanced budget, to ensure we have affordable housing, and ensure that we have proper police reforms. My platform, Equity in Action, supports those pillars. As a candidate, and as a future council member, I will work cooperatively with the council to ensure that Black and Brown voices, the voiceless of El Cerrito, are heard, that your issues are brought to the forefront, that a light is shone on them so that you can participate fully in our community. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Isis. Tessa Rudnick, your closing statement?
Thank you, CCTV, League of Women Voters, and Voters Edge. I am being endorsed by Buffy Wicks, by Nancy Skinner, Rebecca Saltzman, the California Democratic Party, the Contra Costa Young Democrats, the Sierra Club, Central Labor, Buildings and Trade, SDIU 1021, 3 members of council, and many community members from decades in this community to brand new, because they see me as a fresh perspective coming into council, and they believe in my skills. Voting for me is a very safe bet, and voting for me is going to be one of the best things that this community can do in order to resolve the budget issues and to be very pragmatic. I will bring pragmatic leadership, and I'm planning, and I do, represent everyone. This is my community. This is my home. This is my roots. And it's really important that folks know that anyone can come to me. My email's under here. Anyone can email me. It's really important that we collaboratively do this, because these are challenging times. These are hard times. And we're not going to get through it as a community unless we work with each other, unless we work with our neighboring jurisdictions. For more information about me, my website is tessa4elcerrito.com. And please shoot me an email. I'm looking forward to meeting all of you in person.
All right, thank you. Paul Fedeli, your closing statement?
Yes, thank you very much, Contra Costa County and League of Women Voters. We talked a lot tonight about El Cerrito's problems going forward. I just want to go back a little bit and list out what we've achieved in the last 4 years in El Cerrito. We've raised the minimum wage. We've made El Cerrito a sanctuary city. We've supported more affordable housing. We've passed a tenant landlord protection plan and task force. We've kept our pools and recreational facilities open with Measure H. We've passed Measure V, which has kept our budget in line a little bit now with the property transfer tax. We've saved library hours and looked for new venues in the library. And we've promoted development around our BART stations. So those are things that we've done. I have the same endorsements that Tessa has. And the reason they gave endorsements to her was fresh. They gave to me because of my experience in Washington and Sacramento. And I look forward to not leaving El Cerrito, but staying here and working through these problems. It's going to be a set of different problems, but I'm here and I'm willing to help and reach out to people, and people know I'm accessible. Thank you very much.
All right, and Lisa Murayama, your closing statement. And I'm going to let you unmute yourself as well, and then go ahead and start again so that we make sure that you have enough time.
I'd like to thank everybody at CCTV and the Department of Elections and the League of Women and Voters for this opportunity. I'm running for El Cerrito City Council because there are difficult decisions coming in our future, and I really care about this city. I moved to El Cerrito 14 years ago with my husband so that we can raise our expanding family. And we really love all that is really the best in El Cerrito: the shops, the restaurants, the public schools, the parks and open spaces, all these services and people and programs. And there are these decisions that are coming that are very hard. But I know that because I've experienced all these things, that I can make some really good decisions to balance all of those things out. I've also been endorsed by many of the same people, the Sierra Club, the Labor Council, the Building and Trades Council, SEIU 1021, and many council members and former mayors from way back to right now. And I feel that, because of my experience, 8 years on the Planning Commission, that, I do understand how the city government works, and that I have the support and confidence of many people in the city. Affordable housing is my professional background, and it's a critical need in the city. I understand development process. I understand finances. And so this is the professional skill set I bring. But one of the reasons that I am very proud to be part of El Cerrito is that as a planning commissioner, I had the opportunity to approve the specific plan, which also helped to approve Hana Gardens senior housing and the Mabuchi house, which is the Contra Costa florists. As a Japanese American, saving that story of the neighbor that saved their home and business when they were interned during World War II tells me a lot about El Cerrito. And that's the El Cerrito that I really love and would like to see continue as this place of diversity, vibrancy, and really supporting our neighbors. Thank you.
All right, and I want to thank all the candidates for joining us for this forum. So important, and certainly when it's a different world that we live in terms of getting out and meeting the voters, these forums are more important than ever. This will conclude our forum, and let me introduce you once again, or to our candidates who were able to come today. We have Lisa Motoyama, Tessa Rudnick, Paul Fideli, Arthur Yee, and ISIS. We have 3 candidates, Matt Burnham, Jennifer Greel, and William Casanas, who were not able to join us. There are 3 open seats on the City Council. And if you would like more information, because certainly this conversation does continue, we have more information on the candidates at votersedge.org. And the Elections Division has also set up multiple drop-off boxes around the county. And if you want to find the one that's closest to you, please visit www.cocovote.us or call the office. The number is there on the screen, 925-335-7800. I'm Claudine Wong. Thank you so much for watching and for joining us. And do not forget to vote on November 3rd.
Thank you.